Good evening. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Brad Smith. I am the superintendent of the school system, and a pleasure to be here. And I want to thank you so much, each and every one of you, for being here. We're going to go over this evening a little bit of the process that is used for a state-funded construction project such as Mount Ararat High School. Then our chair of the building committee, John Hodge, will talk to you about the work that the building committee has done thus far. And then we'll turn it over to our architectural firm, PDT. And we're all going to introduce ourselves and invite you to introduce yourself as well. And then there'll be an opportunity at the end for you to make statements or ask questions or share your thoughts, whatever you would like to do. Okay, so again, thank you very much for being here. We know how busy everyone is, but this is an incredibly important event for our school system. It's important to the town of Bowdoinham. It's important to all four of our towns. A school project of this size is significant in so many ways. So we're glad that you are here so we can share with you and hear from you. So I'm Brad Smith.
I'm John Hodge. I live in Topsom and I'm chairing the building committee. So again, thank you for being here.
I'm Kathy Cahill with PDT Architects. Chelsea Lippum, she's also with PDT Architects.
And how about you? Would you like to introduce yourself? We'll start off with you.
Jeff Lauder, resident of Bowdoinham. I'm on the town finance committee.
Thank you.
Teresa Turgeon from here in Bowdoinham, and I'm on the select board.
Karen Chilber, I live in Bowdoinham, and I used to work at this school. Susie Hobart.
Brian Hobart, I'm on the select board and I'm the state representative for District 55.
Dan Billings, I live in Bowdoinham.
AJ Booty, Bowdoinham.
Lisa Bowker, Bowdoinham. Michelle Reed, Bowdoinham.
Julie Booty, Bowdoinham, and school board rep and building committee.
Brandy Robertson, Bowdoinham.
Who's this young person?
Brandy Robertson, Bowdoinham.
Tom Allen, Harpswell.
Susie Satterfield, Carly Satterfield, Bowdoinham.
I'm David Engler from Bowdoinham. I'm on the Financial Advisory Committee.
Annette Mott from Bowdoinham. Leslie Mock from Bowdoinham. Tessa Casely, Bowdoinham. Jennifer Merrill, Bowdoinham. Susie Brown, Bowdoinham. And I also serve on the school board.
I'm Chris Lowe, the principal at the Bowdoinham Community School and a resident of Bowdoinham.
I'm Kim Cotton. I'm the school board rep from Bowdoinham, and I'm also on the building committee.
I'm Steve Geyer. I'm the business manager for the school district and former town manager of the town of Bowdoinham.
I'm Chris Shaw, the facilities director for the district, and I'm also on the board.
Thank you all. So as many of... Donna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Donna Susan Moy, I live in Hartsville.
Oh, okay.
So as you know, the question about Mount Ararat High School and how to address the needs of that have been a part of this community for many years. Back as early as 1999, the school district applied to the state to be one of the state-funded projects. So here's an overview of that process. The state will put out to school districts periodically the opportunity to submit your needs to the state, and they have a very comprehensive process. It is a very time-consuming process. They will gather all of that information and then rank the schools in a list. So 75 schools might apply and say, we need to have something done with our elementary school, or we need to have something done with our high school, or something else. The state then typically will look at a group from that list, say the first 5 or 6, and authorize them to go and allow that group to start working towards whether it's a remodel or a new construction or a combination, and we'll talk a little bit about that process in a minute. Then, as they watch those projects get underway, and depending upon the bond capacity of the state, then they will release the next group of 5 or 6, and then maybe a third group of 5 or 6. At that point, they may stop. And they did that to us when we were ranked number 21 and they went up to 20 and stopped and said, okay, all and now we were at about 2014. So we got a call about a year and a half ago from then Commissioner Jim Ryer, who said, it's time, the state board's going to consider authorizing the next group of 6 of which you're a part of. You might want to come up and be there for that. So again, Kim and I and some other, I think that was just Kim and I, went to the State Board of Education meeting where they authorized the next group of 6. And that's as far as they've gone. So we got what we call the green light. Once you get the green light, you start the process. And Kathy will show you a slide of that process. Built into that process are 21 steps. Construction is step 20. We're at step 5. There are lots of decisions that need to be made and a lot of work that needs to be done before we ever start to dig in the soil. So along the way, there are checkpoints. There are straw votes for the community. There are times when we must submit our plan to the State Board of Education, and they must approve it, and there must be a referendum on the entire project that the community support. So Kathy will talk a little bit more about that in detail when we get to the project itself. But we then began the process. One of the first steps was to select an architect. The state has a process for that too. And it includes working with the Bureau of General Services, because the state will pay for all of those costs they deem appropriate for your project. Because we are on the state-approved list, what the state says they'll pay for, they will pay for. And anything above that, we have to pay for locally. So the state has a lot to say in this process, and we work with them and follow that process. We advertise for architects, we receive the proposals as per the requirements. We interviewed 4 architectural firms. We visited 2 schools of one firm in New Hampshire. We visited 2 schools of PDT here in Maine. PDT has done a lot of work in schools in Maine. There are a handful of architects that predominantly do school work in the state of Maine. They're all familiar with the 21-step process. They're familiar with Scott Brown, who is the Director of Facilities for the Department of Education. And that's important because you need someone who's leading the project who knows what the state expects, so that you don't end up at the end being told, we're not going to pay for this. So both of the firms competed for that selection, and The designer selection committee chose PDT, and I'm glad that we are working with them. As soon as we selected an architect, then that committee came to an end, and the school board identified members for a building committee. All of the committees have board representation, one from each town, both the architect selection committee and now the building committee. So there is a member from Bodenham who's on the building committee, and that's Julie Booty. And there are members of the community who are involved in the designer selection committee, and there are members of the community who are on the building committee. There will be subcommittees formed. All of those have been posted. They've been discussed at public board meetings. They're on the district website. People who have expressed an interest can have been selected for that. And Kathy will talk a little bit about how you can get input into that should you have an interest in getting involved in the future with some subcommittee. So it is a very comprehensive process, and we are excited that we are underway with it. The building committee met, is selected the chair, and that's John Hodge. I'll turn it over to you, John. What's the building committee been up to?
Lots of meetings. Again, thank you for coming. Yeah, we started meeting in April, and certainly the first thing we had to do was sort of get ourselves organized. You know, what is our charge? What is it we hope to accomplish? What are sort of our missions and goals? And it really was clear that one of the things that we wanted to make sure as building committee members that we really got the best school that we could for all of the children in our communities. And we also were very certainly mindful that, you know, this has to get approved by the voters. So we know that we have to go to the taxpayers and say, okay, this is the project, and we're hoping at that point that we've got a project that the taxpayers will support. So that's why we're having all of these meetings. Our building committee meetings are open to the public. They're the first Wednesday of the month. They're at the high school at the Learning Commons. Again, they're open to the public. We have a section for public comment. Kathy will tell you there's other ways to provide comments to the building committee, to the school board. We've had 2 public visiting sessions to get out in the community and try to find out from people what it is they'd like to see in their high school. We're having meetings like this in all 4 communities because we want to hear from everybody. What would you like to see? What would you not like to see? What are your concerns? What are your hopes? That's all very important because at this point we're still, as Brad said, in step 5. And what we all have to do as committee members is listen to all of the input from the communities, listen to the advice of the architects. We will at some point be making recommendations. Those will go before the school board. The school board will be making recommendations to the state. All along that process, as Kathy will point out, the state is going to have a big say in what we can do and what we can't do. And one of those first major decisions is renovation versus new, and Kathy will talk about that. But it is important to understand right now that the building committee has not discussed at this point what its recommendations will be because we're still out gathering information, getting details from the architects, waiting to hear back from the state on exactly what direction we should be going. We will continue to have these public meetings to the point we get to, we have to have some straw poll votes in the communities, and then at some point get to a referendum, which we hope would happen in November of 2016. So again, I want to thank you for being here. I hope that you will express all of your hopes and visions and concerns. We need to hear that. We want to hear that, and it's important for us as we go forward and do our work. And certainly I'll be here to answer questions as well. So thank you. Turn it over to Kathy.
Great, thanks. Thanks everyone for coming out. This is the best turnout we've had so far. Good job, Buccaneer. Okay, so this is the 21-step project or 21-step process that Brad mentioned. And this is our You Are Here star. Step 4 was hiring PDT architects. So we're just in our first step as the consultant for this project. And that step 5, includes a lot of data gathering. We spent a good portion of the spring at Mount Ararat High School. We were there almost every day for like 2 weeks straight, interviewing all of the staff, interviewing the students, interviewing all the teachers. We talked to department heads, we talked to the nursing staff, we talked to everybody. and we did an online survey for all the students and had over 280 responses, which is phenomenal for student participation. So that was really successful, and we generated a document that's about 300 pages long of all of the meeting notes from all those meetings. In addition to that, we've been doing a lot of research about the site itself. We have to do environmental research about the site. We have to do wetland surveys of the site. We've done traffic studies. We've done a lot of data gathering about the site itself to make sure that we can work on this existing site. So the two big projects that we're working on right now are this new versus reno study and the site selection study. Part of what we do at the new versus renovation, excuse me, I'm speaking in shorthand. But the new versus renovation study looks at the existing building to evaluate the existing value of the building and determine what needs to be done to it in order to bring it up to code, in order to make it a more academically appropriate building. So I can come back to that slide to talk a little bit more about the process, but I'll talk a little bit more about the meetings that we've had to date. And the meetings that we've had to date have, as John mentioned, these are all the building committee meetings that we've had here. And again, they're all public. They were a little bit less regular early on because we needed to meet more frequently to get some direction and make sure we were headed in the right direction early on. We've had 2 public visioning meetings in the spring, right before everyone left for summer vacation. And now we're having these 4 meetings. And again, as John mentioned, going forward, all the building committee meetings will be held on the first Wednesday of the month at 5:30 in the Learning Commons at the high school. And we'll probably say that 3 or 4 more times to make sure that you get it and you can come as you feel necessary. The other way to get information about the project is the project website. So if you go to the MS 8075 website, or if you go to the high school website, or I think any of the elementary school websites as well, all of them have this nice little graphic down here that says MTA Construction News. And when you click on that, you get to this page. And this page has all the project updates. It has upcoming meetings that are open to the public. It has additional information that we've provided to the building committee. And most importantly, down here in the corner, it has the comments section. This is an anonymous opportunity for anyone in the community to send us their thoughts, their concerns, their questions. They all get directed to Brad and Donna, the principal of the high school, and then they get sorted and sent and given to us and the building committee so that we can address them, hear them, understand them, know what's coming in from the community. This is also the place where if you have an interest in one of the subcommittees, you can express it through this portal here, and that will get to the building committee as well. The subcommittees, there's a lot of work to do on these 21 steps, and the building committee relies on subcommittees to sort of break down the building into pieces so that we can understand how we want the different pieces to fit together. So there'll be subcommittees such as sustainability, building systems, athletics, I think there's one on the site itself. So there are a number of subcommittees that are available and open to the public if the public would like to participate in any of them. There's a list of subcommittees on this website as well. And the graphic that I've been showing, the 21-step process is there, so if you want a refresher on that, you can always click on that. How many of you have actually been in Mount Arad High School? Oh, fantastic. So you know what I'm going to say about it. The challenge of this building is it was designed in the early 70s as an open concept plan. And at the time that was considered a innovative way to address education. And the idea was that there was a much more communal sense of education. There were no classrooms. The classes met in large open spaces and could share ideas and whatever they were learning. It did not work. It did not work then. It really doesn't work now. And the administration at Mount Arad has done a remarkable job of figuring out how to make that space work for today's education needs. And in doing so, a lot of what has happened is, you'll see up in the major classroom wings, the spaces have been divided into little partitioned off classrooms. The problem is that most of those partitions are portable tech boards, they're office cubicles, or they are temporary partitions that are not acoustically sound. And, as you can see here, some of the classrooms are 3 deep, which means that these poor folks in here are not getting any daylight or any fresh air. So it's really not the best design for current academic needs. Typically, a new academic wing is about 75 feet wide. This building is 280 feet by 290 feet. So there's a lot of middle in this building that doesn't have any perimeter, any access to outside light or air. And that was one of the things that we heard over and over again when we were interviewing the teachers and the students, was that they can come in the morning and it's still dark, and leave at the end of the day and it's still dark, and it's dark again, and they have no idea what the weather was like all day long. And that's awful. We can't let that's terrible. So as you can see, some of these classroom spaces, this is a little bit hard to see because it's bright in here, but this is an office partition, and this classroom is actually right adjacent to the corridor that gets you from one classroom to the next. This is one of those, oh thanks Chris, this is one of those 3 deep classrooms. Again, this is a classroom that's separated from the corridor by a tech board. So it's very distracting for the students. It's very difficult for the teachers. They have managed to carve out some pretty fantastic spaces to the best of their ability up there. And I will say that one of the things that's really impressive about the teaching staff at the high school is that they are remarkably collegial out of necessity, but it makes them an incredibly collegial group of people, which is really, really nice to see. One of the other things that happens in this building is that some of the windows, where there are windows, are very high. So it's great for getting light into a space, clerestory light into a space, but it's not good for actually being able to see the outside. This is an art classroom, and you would think that it would be nice for the artists who are maybe painting landscapes to be able to see outside, but they cannot. This is the gymnasium, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It's a very difficult space to use as a gymnasium. The curved roof makes it such that the perimeter spaces along the sides where the ceiling is not, you don't have sufficient ceiling height to have bleachers or cross-court basketball or anything like that. So it makes for a lot of, unfortunately, unusable spaces along the perimeter and ends up being used as storage. It's also a real acoustic challenge in there.
Why, do you know why it was curved to begin with?
I honestly don't know. I honestly don't know.
I thought it was an ice rink one time.
Unless, yeah, it does look like an ice rink. So as part of the new versus renovation study, we look at the existing condition of the building. And we actually had our mechanical, electrical, and structural engineers come out and evaluate the existing systems of the building. The mechanical, electrical systems are ancient, and so it's fairly clear that those will be removed and replaced whole hog if there's a renovation. One of the more challenging things in this building is the structural system. The structural system has been overstressed for most of its life, and has been upgraded over the course of its life to address those issues, snow loads, etc. But currently is not up to code. So there's a fair amount of work that needs to be done to the structural system in order to bring it up to code. The other thing about this building that we've noticed is that the entry, as Lyndon, the principal architect of the project, who apologizes he's out of the country this week or he would be here, but he says that as you drive by, the sort of windshield test of the building is quite nice. It's quite acceptable. It has a nice foundation. It has these sort of nice curved windows at the entry. This is the main entry. It has some metal siding around the perimeter, and it appears to have a fair number of windows. As you drive around the building, you start to notice that the windows start to taper off, and now there are no windows here. And the metal siding has become T111, which is a plywood siding product. And as you get around to the back, you see that This is actually the back side of the building. It's not very attractive, and also has a fairly dysfunctional loading dock. The loading dock is parallel to the building. I don't know how they do any deliveries there. It's amazing. This is the gymnasium, again, curved roof. You know that well, I'm sure. And this is what I was talking about in terms of the size of the building compared to a typical classroom wing. So the situation with a renovation of this building means that we would attempt in renovating the building to provide more natural daylight into the center of the building, which means we would try to scoop out a big section of the middle of the building and create atrium spaces and courtyards so that we could get more daylight into the existing building. And then the idea would be to replace a portion of that lost square footage in an addition. One thing that we try to make clear when we talk about a new project, new construction versus renovation of an existing building, is that when we renovate a building, and if we were to renovate this building, it's a full gut down to the structure. In this particular case especially, all the mechanical systems, all the electrical systems go. The building gets completely stripped down to its bones. So regardless of whether it's a new building or a renovated building, from our point of view, it would appear to be a new building and function like a new building. This is an example of a renovation that we did in Farmington. This is Mount Blue High School. Predominantly, PDT does renovation projects. Most of our high school projects especially are renovations. Because often we find that in an existing high school, there are portions of it that are in good shape and can be reused. For example, gymnasiums. Or in this case, they had a 3-story classroom wing that was approximately 75 feet wide, so you were able to get a corridor down the center with classrooms on either side. All the classrooms had natural daylight, and the structure was in really good shape. It had its own challenges. It was very short floor-to-floor height, so we had to squeeze the mechanical system in there, but it was cost-effective and worth the effort to save this wing of the building and renovate it to maintain the classroom wing at this school. One of the things that we did here, that we will also look at in all of our projects, is the envelope of the building. This particular existing envelope was quite inefficient in terms of energy. So we actually built a new thermal envelope, a new wall outside the existing masonry wall in order to improve the overall thermal performance of that building and get the energy savings that we wanted for this building. And it looks absolutely nothing like a building built in the early 70s, which this one was as well. So speaking of energy, we also look at what we think we can do for energy cost savings. And the current cost per square foot for Mount Ararat High School is $1.23 a square foot, which is really not that bad. It's actually quite good. But we have been able to do significantly better with most of our new buildings or renovated buildings. This is what we were able to get at that Mount Blue project. There was a combination renovation and addition, or combination renovation and new construction. And you can see what the annual savings pile up to be over the course of the life of the project. We would like, on a project like this, regardless of whether it's new or renovation, we would like to target something lower, closer to maybe 60 or 75 cents per square foot, and we think that that might be doable. So that would increase savings as well. So when we look at the new versus reno, we look at all of the factors that are playing into the condition of the building and the condition of the site. And we consider, basically what happens is the state will tell us what they will allow us to build in terms of square footage if it were going to be a new project. And we have used, for an apples-to-apples comparison, 150,000 square feet. If we do a renovation and we scoop out the middle of the building, they will still only allow us to build approximately 150,000 square feet. So we look at those numbers and we say, okay, these are numbers all sort of equate. And then we look at what the premiums are associated with the different options. And that's where we can actually look at the deltas associated with the two options. And we determined that building new construction that allows all of the students to stay in the existing high school was the most cost-effective way to approach this project. And then we compared other alternatives. We looked at renovation of the existing building, where we're able to keep half the students in portable classrooms, and potentially half the students can be distributed in other building or buildings in the district. We don't make that decision. We are making assumptions about what potentially could happen. No decisions have been made about how the students will be handled or distributed during construction. The one thing that we strongly stand behind on this project is that the students cannot remain in the building while the building is being renovated. It's not a safe situation. The building is designed such that we can't partition off parts of the building and renovate parts of the building and keep students in another part of the building. It's just not a safe situation. So we know if we're going to renovate the building, we have to get all the students out of the building for the duration of construction. So that ends up being an approximate premium of $2.8 million. We look at a major renovation where all of the students are housed in portable classrooms somewhere on the campus, and that is a premium of approximately 4.3. The other thing to consider that is an additional premium for renovation versus construction is duration of the construction period. New construction tends to take a lot less time than a renovation, largely because discovered conditions and renovating an existing building, as anyone who's done their own kitchen or bathroom knows, it always takes longer than you think it should. We also looked at new construction, same thing, half the students in portable classrooms, half the students in a building somewhere else in the district, and new construction where all of the students are housed in portable classrooms. Again, the difference between this number and this number is really based on significantly on the duration of construction. Now, you will also notice that these numbers, they are high, but on a significant high school project, they are a small percentage of the project itself. So, the cost factor is really not the deciding factor on this project at all. There are many other deciding factors that need to be considered, and that's what the building committee will be working on with the public and with other considerations. And that includes the disruption to the students and the staff during the construction period. It includes the duration of construction, new versus renovation, different duration. It includes the public preference for what the public would like to see. Would the public prefer to have a new building versus a renovated building? And we'll also help them look at the performance history of the existing building. Things like the energy costs, but also, but also things like how the site functions and how circulation on the site functions and how the fields are working and are the fields successful and are there other opportunities for fields on the site. So we try not to, in this case in particular, the differential cost increments from the 4 options that we've presented will be one of many considerations, and a fairly minor one at that. Yes?
At the voting meeting that we had, you guys pointed out that Mount Blue project,
Yes.
it was a 3-year renovation, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
So I'm going to repeat the question. Thanks, Chris. At the Bowdoin meeting, which was last week, we mentioned that Mount Blue project, which was a high school and an integrated CTE program, that project took approximately 3 years from start to finish of construction.
What's CTE?
Oh, CTE is Community Technical.
Oh, okay.
Yes, sorry, yes, that's what it's called. So, oh yes.
So is that being, at one point, that was up in the air. Is that being considered at all?
I'm going to let Brad answer that question, because
Good
that's
question.
out of my wheelhouse, but that's an excellent question.
Can you repeat the question?
Got it. So the question is, are we looking at CTE to be done in conjunction with this project? The answer is that's an option. The state divides the the state into, I think it's 27 different regions to provide career technical education. For our school district, Brunswick and RSU 5, we happen to be Region 10. Region 10 is where we send our students for career technical education. It's a half-day program. We bus our students over there. We have about 100 students from MS80 75 who attend Region 10 half-day program. We operate Region 10 in conjunction with Brunswick School Department and RSU 5. As we began this project, we were aware that at the same time we were looking at our project, Region 10 is looking at their building and some needs that they have for their facility. And they did a study. It turned out it was also with PDT, Portland Design Team, estimating that to do upgrades to the Region 10 building, which is in Brunswick on Church Road, would be around $10 million. So one of the questions that occurred to us is there a way, instead of investing $10 million on Region 10's facility, is there a way to hook Region 10 onto the Mount Ararat project? That is a possibility that is still being explored, although the window for doing that for our project is quickly approaching. We did have a meeting a couple of weeks ago. The superintendents of the 3 school districts that are involved, the director of Region 10, and the Commissioner of Education, and Scott Brown from the state, to talk about the possibility of something like that. The Commissioner said that he would be happy to look into that, and we haven't heard anything further from that. So it's an option that's out there, but our focus, for tonight really is on the Mount Ararat project.
I just wanted to ask, how many of the 100 that go to Region 10, how does that compare with the numbers from Brunswick and Freeport?
We have the majority of students who attend compared to the other 2 districts. Yeah.
Is there any data, any knowledge about how that program is working at Mountain? Like how is it a functioning, well-liked program?
It is, but it has always been part of,
Oh, it was?
yeah, it was on the campus originally, and it was a series of separate buildings on the campus. And so we were able to, what they wanted to do was integrate it more into one building, as opposed to having separate buildings.
And is it just Mountain Blue kids that go there, or is it also a district?
Well, so Mount Blue is MS89. So it has its own, it's a regional school as well. And I believe that the technical school also pulls students from other regions outside of MS89. Great. So the PDT, to wrap up the sort of renovation conversation, PDT has recommended to the building committee that a new construction project would be more cost effective than a renovation of an existing building. However, because of all of the reasons that I stipulated earlier, the building committee has not made any decisions about that, and they are looking at a whole host of additional information in order to make this decision, including information about the site itself. So we've started looking at the site itself, and I can tell you a little bit about what we've learned so far. This is an approximation of the property owned by the district. There's some minor errors in the red line, but predominantly the red line represents the property owned by the district. This is the high school here. This is the middle school here. There are a number of fields out here, and there's additional high school fields here as well. Practice field over here. And to orient you, this is 201 here, and 196 is down here. So we're focusing predominantly on this area here, although we'll be looking at the total campus in terms of the field assets of the existing campus to see if there's a more efficient way to look at how the field space is used. So what we've done is we look at, as part of the research that we're doing in this early phase, we look at the possibilities to us, to the community, to the building committee, for locating a building on this site. We call them site test fits. It allows us to make sure, they're sort of proofs that show that we can in fact do a building on this site. And we look at various permutations of that to make sure that whatever decision is made about new versus renovation, that we can do either of those options, that we can make either of those options work on the site. So this first, we look at various scenarios. We look at options where we tear down the existing building and build new and keep the fields where they are. We look at this one theorizes that potentially this wing could be built while this building is still in existence and in operation to minimize the amount of time that the students have to be displaced from the high school. The important thing to understand about these is they are proofs, they're test fits, they're not designs. They're just square footages blocked out on a site to make sure that we are not being irresponsible about making assumptions in the site in terms of what square footage could actually fit on the site. We look at options such as this one, where the existing building stays during the duration of construction, and a new building is built potentially around the existing building, and then the existing building comes down. That's one option where we could potentially keep the students in the existing building during the duration of construction. And then we look at options such as this one, where we renovate the existing building, and like I said before, try to scoop out some of the middle of the building to get more light down into the existing building. But again, achieving some of the site improvements potentially that we've talked about, but predominantly keeping a large portion of the site the way it is. And then we look at options such as this one, where the building comes down and we build a new building in its place. Potentially, this one, we could build a wing here. The existing building is approximately here. So that's again an option that would allow us to keep the students in the existing building for a little bit longer while we do some construction. And then we look at options like this one, where we build a new building over here and keep the existing building fully functional during the entire duration of construction, with the exception of, and move all the students over to the existing, then to the new building, and then rebuild fields where the existing building is currently. And all of these options, what these options do is they prove to us, they prove to the building committee, and most importantly, they prove to the state that we can stay on this site. And that was something that we heard from the very beginning, that the building committee wanted to stay on the site. Most of the people almost everyone that we interviewed wanted to stay on the site. It was something that was talked about during the public visioning meetings in the spring as well. The site is lovely, and it is definitely worth trying to make a new high school work in that environment. So we feel very confident that whatever decision is made about new versus renovation, we feel very confident that we can stay on this site. And whatever decision is made about how we handle the students during construction, we can stay on this site. So that's my little spiel. That kind of brings you up to date with what we've been doing so far and what the work that we've done with the building committee. And one of the reasons that we're having all of these meetings is to make sure that you all get to see what we've been doing and comment on it and give us feedback. You can tell us which option you like best, or you can tell us that you don't like any of the options. That's okay too. But we want to hear your questions and we want to hear your comments. So if you want to stand up and speak loudly, we'll do our best to answer them.
Were there ever any other sites explored? There were not.
No, the question was, were there any other sites explored? And there were not. largely because there was such a strong sentiment to stay on this site. The first thing we did was to prove that we could stay on this site, and now that we have proven that we can stay on the site, we probably are not going to go down the avenue of purchasing additional property or looking at other properties to purchase so that we can build a new school. Yes?
If you renovated the existing building and scooped out the center, as you've stated,
Yeah.
how much would that reduce the square footage of the building?
Well, so what happens with the state, as Brad mentioned earlier, the state that pulls the purse strings for the project, and they weigh quite heavily on how that money is spent. So once they've determined how much square footage total a new building could be, that will also be the square footage that they look at for a renovated building. So we don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. The current building is approximately 158,000 square feet. If the state says to us, you must use 150,000 square feet, then that's what we would look at for a renovation as well. However, as Brad has reminded me on many occasions, the state controls the money that they will spend, and additional local dollars are always an option for spending additional money to do things above and beyond what the state will allow. And one of the most common examples is an auditorium. So often high schools are looking for a nice large auditorium. The state will only pay for an auditorium that will seat 1/3 of the student population. And nobody wants an auditorium that only seats 1/3 of the population. So one of the most common things that local dollars go to in a project like a high school is increasing the size of the auditorium. Another thing that local dollars often go to is additional classrooms or larger square footage assigned to certain classrooms, because the state also has formulas for square footages for classrooms. So there's opportunity for the project to be larger than what the state would mandate, but that is something that the local communities have to discuss.
So let me see if I understand this. The state is going to tell you how many square feet you need?
Yeah, that they will pay for.
We
Whether
decide what we need.
They decide what you need?
We will decide what we need. If the communities want more and willing to pay for it, they
Yep.
can pay for it.
I see.
But the state's going to say, this is what we'll give you, based on square footage. So that's why, again, we're all here. You know, what is it we want to see? Do we want to just stick with that formula? Are we willing to pay for more? And what is that? What are the priorities? If we're willing to put local dollars, is it for auditoriums? Is it for classroom size? Is it for athletic fields?
Is it a possibility of building a new building in option 5 and keeping the auditorium that exists now?
The Orion Auditorium?
No, no. Well, you mean the common?
So
Well, you get
there's,
2 auditoriums as it is, right?
Let me try.
yeah,
Yes.
you work on
So-
those.
Several years ago, these communities voted for the Orion as a performing arts center. That's attached to the middle school, and that's going to remain there.
Okay.
So what we will look at is typically a high school will have an auditorium. So do we need another 800-person auditorium for our project? Absolutely not. Right? We have a very valuable resource in Orion. So we will try to dicker with the state to say, maybe we need an auditorium for 1/3 of the student bodies, or maybe we need a smaller scale, large group gathering. You know, but if the state would typically spend that much money on an auditorium, we'd like to try to see if maybe some of those funds could be redirected to
I
something
see.
else.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
Just a comment about the site issue. I'm glad to see you're looking at the existing site, and that seems to be where you're going, because one thing that concerns me is if you looked at another site, and assuming the school would be in Topsom, where you would go would be the outskirts, which would likely require more busing. And as a graduate of this school and spending an hour on the bus every afternoon going home, and there are lots of kids like that, and the 3 outside communities that are doing that now, the one thing that is really good about this site, as well as, I mean, I agree it looks nice, it's a perfect location for the four communities. You have 201, 196, the bypass, the highway all close by. And I think when you're looking at, if you're going to a greenfield site, you'd likely be heading up towards Lisbon or somewhere else, which would add to the commute for students, which I just think would be a disaster because the amount of time kids spend on buses already is too much. When you talk about state funding, what does that actually mean? It's my understanding there's some formula that even with the state funding, the taxpayers are going to be, kicking in a percentage, and without getting into extras, just as far as, what the state pays for, what will they expect us to pay for as part of that?
So if you were to stick with just what the state authorized you to do, then the state would pay for 100% of that with a very few exceptions. So as an example, some of what the architect has done thus far, like the public meetings we held, the state won't pay for those. Those will be funded locally. It runs through the EPS funding formula. So it's debt service in terms of how it's viewed from the state. So it applies into the EPS funding formula just as would the number of students that we have. So for the communities, if you built only what the state approved, there wouldn't be additional local dollars. It's difficult to do that, although there are school systems that do that. The last high school publicly funded in the state of Maine that's open is Hamden Academy up in the Bangor area. Why am I blanking on the name of that town, Steve?
Hamden.
Hamden. Hamden Academy, where is that? Who's buried in Grant's tomb? That project was about $43 million. Because Hamden Academy wanted to have an auditorium large enough for all their students, they added $2.6 million for local. So that puts it sort of, that gives you an idea. So the state picked up their share, all but $2.6 million. Although we all know that when it comes to taxes, it's all our taxes anyway, right? There is no freebie here. But the state's portion, if you stick with them, is 100% for those districts through EPS.
When you talk about whether we want to be larger or not, I know that we were suggesting there, but I mean, I would think you take into consideration sort of the trends here, and I think we're still on a nearly 20-year trend here where the number of students we have in the district is falling or flat, and that as far as, I mean, I think I was there in the 80s where there were, twice as many kids in that building as there are now. And I don't think, because of the whole construction, the way it was originally constructed and putting the walls, that there's a very efficient use of the space. I mean, not to criticize, people are doing the best they can with what they got. I'm not being critical. But I would assume that if we were either building new or renovating, that the architects could make better use of that space. And I mean, so when we talk about what the state would pay as far as the amount of square footage, it seems like if we got anything close to what we have for square footage now and it was built for a modern school, we'd be in great shape.
So the question comes down, there's several questions in there, but
Yeah.
one is in terms of what are the trends that's happening. Part of the process the state requires is that you have an enrollment study, a projection, which for us goes out to 2025. We had a company who specializes in that do that for us. That's Planning Decisions. They did a study looking at new home construction in the four communities, the number of families moving, migration in as well as migration moving out, birth rate. Then they compare all of that historical data to how many kids actually show up in first grade 6 years later to see what kind of correlation one can find between birth rates and all those other factors and the number of students who show up. And you're absolutely right. Our district has and will continue to be faced with declining enrollments. That's one of the biggest challenges that we're going to be faced with. I mean, think about the fact that we'll be busing fewer students, but we have to travel just as far and just as many roads with just as many buses. Okay? So there are those kinds of aspects that come into play for us. We have coming in this year into kindergarten 169 students. So coming into the system is 169, and we've had graduating classes in recent years in excess of 200. So you're absolutely right, that enrollment pattern will go down. The state will look at that and say, here's how large we will build the school for this number of students. And we're hoping, this was our last night's, we're hoping the state will accept the proposed number of 750 students. They're currently between 720 and 730. Donna, any big change in enrollment today? 740. Good. It's closer. That's good. Okay.
Now, I have a question for the architect. Now, the existing building is 43 years old, and they wanted to replace it 15 years ago, and that's kind of disappointing, but I'd already graduated from high school long before that building was built, and we were disappointed then. The new building, if we built a new building, what would be the life expectancy of that building?
That's an excellent question. The current life expectancy for new high schools is 50 years.
50? And is that, because these people that study the future's enrollment, you know, I don't know whether they take into consideration that 10 years from now, maybe virtual classrooms will really catch on. That's a possibility. So enrollment would plunge. But how about if it goes the other way, and let's say the federal government rewards us with 100,000 immigrants. Is this school going to be, will it be able to enlarge it, add wings?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something that we look at. Every single one of these studies that we do with test beds looks at how we could potentially expand the building in the future. We all know that it's cheaper to build everything you need when you're building, but we also know that there's always that possibility that we would need more space. So if I flip back to some of these test fit options, you'll see that in this option, this is the new building, and this is where we're proposing that expansion could happen. And in this option, for example, new construction or renovation or whatever, and expansion. So we always look at the possibility of expansion, and the state will want us to look at that as well.
If the existing building was renovated, could that be expanded?
Yes, yes, and I don't know if, let's see, does this one, we talked about it, let's see. I think in this one, we kept the ring road, so it limited the expansion. That's the one thing that we looked at in this particular option. But yes, we would look at the possibility of expanding, as Chris is pointing in the back, he's going, up, because he's right. We would look at expanding into this softball field here, expanding north and reconfiguring the circulation on the site. So yes, it's always considered, no matter whether it's renovation or new construction, expansion has to be considered. And what we look at, it's not just where on the site, but we actually look at how the building is designed so that expansion makes sense, so that we're not just adding more classrooms onto a long choo-choo train of classrooms, that we would design the building in a manner that still keeps centralized necessities centralized, and the expansion happens in a logical location. Yes?
Well, I know, Brad, you said the window is closing for considering, for making decisions with regard to adding a vocational school or CTE. Is there there must be some process for having that conversation. I wonder what that is. I know I believe in some advantages that would definitely benefit Mount Ararat if they could be together. And yet that's different from the site plans that are here.
Okay, it's a complicated answer. I'll do a short one and then I can talk with you afterwards. In the state of Maine, career technical education is provided one of two ways. You are either a center, which means that the local school board operates you, and that's the governing body, or you are a region. And if you are a region, which we are, there is a separate board that is the cooperative board for Region 10 that runs Region 10. And to bring Region 10 into the Mount Ararat project would in all likelihood require a change of governance from being a region into being a center. You can still do those things, and there are lots of advantages for having an integrated CTE program. When we got the new list, we found we were number 7. We wondered, why aren't we number 1? Number 1 turned out to be Sanford. Sanford is building not only a new high school, but a complete CTE program within the 4 walls of the school and interspersed throughout the building. They have gone up to 23 programs that will be in that project. We currently offer, I believe, 12 at Region 10. But it is a complicated process that hasn't actually happened in Maine yet. It's been explored, but we haven't seen a region convert to a center yet. So it is in statute. It does tell us what has to happen. And again, the meeting with the commissioner was, it comes down to several key things, one of which is the commissioner has to approve it, the state board has to approve any change in governance. So the short answer is the commissioner said he would look into it, and we will hopefully hear back from him in a couple of weeks.
What is the exact deadline?
Well, we were talking about the end of October. We haven't pinpointed a specific date. I think one of the concerns that we would have, as I know that our board would have, is not wanting to see any delay jeopardize our project, that our highest priority is for our project to move forward. So I think that there might be a little bit of flexibility there, but no exact date.
The time frame for a new construction versus renovation?
The question was a time frame associated with new construction versus renovation. Do you mean the duration of construction?
Yes.
Okay, so duration of construction, what we see typically on a high school, new high school would be approximately 2 years, renovation would be approximately 3 years. It's all speculation until we actually know what the extent of the scope of work is for either of them, but that is what we have seen in the past, and that's what we would probably see in this case as well.
So those figures of displacing students would be per year. So if it was a renovation, that would be 3 times the number that you had up there?
No, those numbers take that duration into consideration. So the question was, the numbers that I showed, the premiums that were shown earlier, are they per year, or are they total for new construction versus renovation construction? And they are total, they are not per year. Yes?
So you talked about it being a 21-step process and us being on step 5. And we talked about where we were on the list at one point, and then it changed somewhat unexpectedly. And I understand the referendum piece of it, but is there some point in this where, as you said, a green light, we could be stopped in going forward, not by the referendum, but by something else that the state says, or something like that?
That's a good question. It's unlikely. Predominantly, once they've told you go, they help you go.
Okay.
The one thing that we're all working towards that is the most critical for this project is the referendum. And once we hit referendum, there shouldn't be anything that slows us down. Now, natural disaster, potentially, you know, there's always something potential, but the state itself will help move the process along as much as they can. Yes?
I know that you mentioned before that step 1 through 21 was a 5-year process, correct?
1 through 21 is approximately 5 years, roughly.
So if it's a renovation, does that 1 through 21 become a 6-year?
Potentially. So the question was, if the 21-step process is approximately 5 years, if it's a renovation, does it become a 6-year process? And there's potential for that. A lot of it hinges on some of the earlier things that are that need to happen. The referendum is the really important one. Make sure that that happens, and then that doesn't slow us down. But between 5 and 6 years is what we're looking at for, yeah. Yes?
I hesitate to ask this question, but you mentioned with the funding, it goes through the EPS formula and it's part of the debt service. Do we have other state-funded projects that we're currently getting funds for, and are some of those coming to an end, or where are we in that?
Yes.
My understanding that
Yes.
how much local funds you pay considers all of the debt
Sure.
service you pay.
We have two state-funded projects going off, one in 2021 and 2021. That's the middle school project and Bowdoin Central School. I'll look back to the business manager to see if I got those two right.
And I just want to say, on the timetable with the referendum, you're shooting for November of 16. I hope you stick with that, because this is an important project, and that's a big election. We'll have, good cross-section of the community. And I always find it disturbing with big projects like this in some other communities, they get stuck in some special election in October or December. And that's always, said that just happened. But it's skeptical, and I think it'd be important and good faith for the community to have the vote when people are going to vote.
We completely agree, and so does the building committee, and that's why the building committee has charged the team with making sure that November referendum happens. There's a question back here.
What happens if the referendum doesn't pass? Or have you ever experienced a situation where the referendum doesn't pass? What happens?
That's an excellent question. So what happens is we go back to the drawing boards and we try to understand why it didn't pass. Sometimes it doesn't pass because the local dollar contribution was not fully supported by the communities. And so we look at that and we look at ways to reconfigure that so that it can be more amenable to the 4 communities. Sometimes, and that's generally the main reason why referendums don't pass, is the local dollar contribution. Because that's really what the referendum, it's rare that by the time we get to referendum that people are not on board with the design of the project. It's more likely that it has to do with the cost of the project.
And can't that be split out? Because when we voted on the middle school, wasn't the Orion a separate question? They both passed, but I think they were split out, weren't they, on the actual vote?
I honestly don't know. I wasn't here. I don't know. Kim, you might know. Do you recall?
I was thinking that the middle school, for voting for the extra seats, I thought that was a separate vote. That was a separate class, because the Orion is essentially supposed to be its own entity. It's not the middle school. It's supposed to be self-supporting, and that's why they voted to add the additional seats, to make it sort of be more self-supporting and be a community asset.
Because that's one option. If there's something that, obviously it depends on what the extra dollars are for. Obviously, it's larger classrooms or something that probably can't be split off easily. But if it's something like that, a larger auditorium or that kind of thing, you could put it. And again, in that case, that was my understanding as well. Obviously, that passed. So
The question is an excellent one, because we, as a community and a building committee, don't want to get too far out in front of the parade and lose the parade and not have the support. So it's important for you to ask questions. It's important for you to share your preferences and your concerns and your hopes, and John will talk about that too. Because if we get to that referendum and it fails, the state will not reimburse us for anything we've done thus far. And we don't want to get there. So we want a building that the communities are proud of and support.
You were very clear that the gymnasium doesn't suit the current, doesn't work. So are you planning in this, either the renovation or a new gymnasium?
Yes. So the question was that my presentation stipulated that the existing gymnasium is not a functional gymnasium. And so will there be a new gymnasium as part of the project? And the answer is yes, there will be. And the state, we've had conversations with Scott Brown thus far, and they are in favor of us building a new gymnasium as part of this project, whether it's renovation or new.
If I could just add too, I will say that we've had some comments that some people would like to see the field house stay. While it's not been functional for high school athletics, it's been very functional for recreation programs and other events, wrestling meets, a train show that goes on there. So that's one thing we want to hear from people in the community. And certainly we'll be meeting with Topsom next week because they may have the biggest advantage if that field house stays. So the question would be, are they willing to pay for it? Separate from the other communities. Now, if the other communities will also want to keep it and use it for events, then the 4 communities would have to look at that. But that has been discussed. People have made those comments that they would like to see that stay. We don't know whether that's viable or not, but we certainly welcome people's opinion on that.
Can you put number 5 up, the slide for 5, or
Sure can.
just so you can show that that concept does show it's still there?
A number of our concepts, our test fits, show keeping the existing field house and a new gymnasium. These blobs on the plan, there's no program associated with them, but the square footage includes a new gymnasium. Number 5, the option where we build a new building on the existing fields. That test fit does show keeping that field house, or the potential of keeping that field house. So when we do these test fits, we try to give ourselves the worst case scenario. So worst case scenario is we keep the field house and we have to fit fields around it and we build a new building.
In that, can you put the pointer on where the new gymnasium would be in that option?
No, because we don't know. It's not actually a plan that shows where all the program goes. So it's just bulk square footage, and the bulk square footage includes the square footage of a new gymnasium.
So when you say, John, when you say pay for it, so example, that would be if, say in that scenario where we built a school, down towards the road, it would be paying for what we have to. I assume there's new
Some renovations
systems and
yep.
renovations and that kind of thing,
Yep.
and then there'd be some operating costs
Exactly.
going forward. So those would be the extras.
Yeah.
So that might be an example of something that could be, if that's the scenario that ultimately was chosen by the building committee, where the field house could be a separate question.
Right.
People could vote on it one way or the other and not tied up with whether we need a new school or not.
That's a perfect example. Julie, you had a question.
I don't remember which school it was, but one of the schools had a new gymnasium and they had an inside walking path on the second floor that was really open to seniors being able to access.
So one of the things that we've heard most predominantly in the public visioning meetings that we had in the spring, and again this evening, I think your husband mentioned it at the beginning, was that there's a strong desire for a new or renovated high school to include a number of community assets so that the community can use the high school more than they already do. And frankly, this building is used quite a bit by the community. The adult ed program uses it very much, in addition to rec programs, etc. So those are the sorts of things that we'll be looking at too, is what sort of assets can the building provide to the community that the community can use regularly, and are those things that are they dual function? Can they also function as academic spaces so that the cost of them is picked up by the state, or are they something additional that the community is looking for above and beyond what the state would pay for? And all of those things are things that we need to consider in the coming months.
Kim in the back.
Kim, thank you.
I just wanted to make sure too that people realize that while we're looking at the referendum, there's straw polls, straw polls that we do beforehand, that people will have the opportunity to give us non-binding yay or nay with that, so we know if we're heading in the right direction. We're not going to go to referendum and be totally blown out of the water because we didn't realize we weren't there yet. There's other opportunities to get an initial thumbs up, thumbs down.
So thank you, Kim. That's an excellent point. So local referendum is step 13. There's a straw vote that happens at step 12, and a straw vote that happens here as well, I believe, at step 6. So step 6 has to do with site, making sure that it's a site selection straw vote. So if this were a community where you had 6 sites that you were trying to figure out which one would the high school go on, you would vote on one of those 6 sites. In this particular instance, it will be a vote to support or not support staying on the existing site. But again, there is a straw vote that happens at step 12 after concept design. But there will likely be, concept design will likely be complete in the late spring of next year, but there'll be additional community meetings that happen before that straw vote as well. This one, yes.
I'm interested in terms of between renovation and new build, what you're hearing back. Full disclosure, I'm very much in favor of new build. We've had 2 generations do their penance of going to the mistaken build that we approved 40-some years ago. But are you starting to get feedback? Do you have a sense of what, in meetings like this, how people are oriented?
Yes, and I'll be honest, we hear both. We do hear both. The staff, when we interview the teachers, they predominantly say, please bulldoze this building. But a number of the public community has also expressed the same desire. I think the important thing to remember is that, I said this earlier, so I apologize for repeating myself, but when we renovate buildings, they don't look like the building that they were before, and we strive to make them not function the way they functioned before, especially if the functioning was poor. So the outcome of renovation versus new, we try to make sure that the outcome is successful either way.
But it's not really about that. It's about what happens to the kids in the meantime.
There are other considerations.
That's
yeah.
true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
right.
I think I would say the other thing that seems to be coming through loud and clear to this point is a high level of concern about what happens to the students during the construction phase, whether it's renovation or new, what happens to their education during that time. That's a large thing that just keeps surfacing. We don't know yet if we could house half of the students in existing facilities. We don't know. We don't know what that would mean if we did. We do know that the middle school doesn't have as many students in it as it was originally built for, so we have capacity. That doesn't mean there's room to empty sitting there. Everything gets used up. But we don't know that we could even do what has been thrown out as an option to house half in existing space and have portables.
You had a question over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on safety a little bit, so it's kind of a 2-part, more of a statement than a question. First of all, I think you have half of the kids from the high school in portables. That's going to be a safety challenge. Secondly, we talked about having an indoor track that seniors can use, and at what point in time can they use this track? Before school, after school? Are you having people come in and out of the school all day that you have no idea they even belong to the community, and they're coming into our high school to use a track? So I think safety would also be a high priority.
Absolutely. Question and comment is really around safety. Then that's one of the gentlemen up earlier was talking about when he was in the Navy, that sort of you want to have open house so people can come see your facilities. On the other hand, you have security issues, so you don't. That's the balance. And as we visited schools, there are ways to design schools so that certain areas have some access during certain times. And we had a chance to see schools down in New Hampshire where they're similar to Mount Ararat, where you came in and there was a security booth there, and that sort of time period. We do look at one entrance. Their school security is a big issue, not just for us in schools, but for the state and Maine and the Department of Education as well. It's a balancing act. How open can you make your facilities? And we want the communities to use them, but there's measures we will have to take to keep our kids safe.
On the renovation versus new build, I think, again, as a graduate of school many years ago, I think in some communities there's a lot of sentiment for an old building and it has sentimental value. I can't imagine anybody who graduated from that school. They may have a good feeling about what their experience, but the building, I never heard anyone express any love for that building. So I don't think that's an issue. I know when you talk about the renovation versus new build, one of the big legitimate concerns is the impact on the kids. I think if we're focusing on the same site, which I absolutely believe we should, there's going to be impact on the kids even if it's completely new build. I worked in a courthouse where we built the big new courthouse out behind, and you know, there's construction is going to impact the kids one way or the other. Obviously, I have professionals who try to minimize that and so forth, but the idea that new build would mean little or no impact on the education of the kids when we're talking about the same site, I don't think that's not necessarily the case. Maybe less of an impact, but there's still going to be an impact when you look at this site and how it currently works, and you think about a major construction project anywhere on that site, it's going to have an impact.
But the kids are still going to be bused to a school where they get an education and then go home. They're not going to be half from here, half from there, longer bus rides. I think that it's a much greater impact if you're talking about mobile homes and half the kids in a middle school and BCS picking up 6th grade or whatever it is you're going to do. It's a huge impact.
Yeah, I hadn't thought too much before about broader community use, but just wonder, since you mentioned it, has the idea of a swimming pool ever come up?
I'll tell you.
Thank you for raising it.
I'm going to tell you a funny story.
Extraordinary expense, but it would be community commitment.
Every one of the students that we met with said, "Can we get the swimming pool on the 3rd floor?" Because there's a running joke in high school that as a freshman, I don't know how freshmen actually survive their first year at that school. And the upperclassmen all help the freshmen get around the building and find the classroom that they're looking for. And one of the jokes is that they all tell the freshmen, "Don't forget to go check out the swimming pool on the 3rd floor. It's really cool." There's no 3rd floor. So the students all requested a swimming pool. But that's the first we've heard of a legitimate request for a swimming pool. So there was a question back there.
I was just going to piggyback on the last few years.
Yeah, so one of the things you'll notice is that Chelsea here is our scribe for the evening. And we're taking all of your comments and putting them together and getting them to the building committees, that they have all of the comments from the public meetings to consider as part of the decision making. So your comment is spot on.
It's that social aspect of it we've been hearing, and I have 3 children that all graduated, and one of the things I loved about Mount Ararat is they participated in athletics. They would have a freshman buddy, and they would see those freshmen during the day and become friends. And I remember my son was a freshman, having juniors and seniors that were his friends, and I liked that. I mean, they were older kids looking out for him, and that always made me feel good as a parent.
Anything else? Does anyone have any fears, concerns, worries?
I'm afraid you're going to spend too much money.
Nope, thank you. Yep.
It's a valid concern.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm always saying, get what you pay for.
It's a balance. We want to get the best we can for what we can afford. Absolutely, we have to be mindful of a number of things, and that's certainly one of the things we have to be mindful of. Yeah. One of the things I'd like to address too is you'll probably during the course of the next year or two hear a lot of things out in the community. The rumor mill just get started. Ask yourself if somebody's telling you something, where did you hear it from? Did you go to a building committee and hear it at the building committee, or did your neighbor just say something? So I caution you to hear things and just pass it along. Get in touch with the building committee. Ask us, hey, I heard this. Is that true? Come to the sources, whether it's the school board or the building committee or town boards of selectmen. Let's hear what's actually going on, and let's try to keep the rumor mill to a minimum. It is human nature. I'm sure I've participated in it several times myself, but I do offer that as an expression of hope going forward.
Yes, you have a question here?
As part of the design process, once we get into the actual building design and the
the bells and whistles? Do you create like a pie in the sky, everything we could possibly imagine and love and hope for design, and then we kind of pick down from there?
We probably won't do that. That's very depressing.
It's the vision of if everybody got what they wanted, this is what it would look like in reality.
Yeah.
Versus, what we can afford, and then you kind of, and compromise, and then the extra dollars don't seem so horrible. Because it's not all the way up here.
What we use as a guiding principle to help us design the building and do the programming is what's called an education specification. And that is something that the high school has tasked a committee of people to actually write. And they write what their goals are for a high school and what they want a new high school to do for the community and to do for the students. So we put that together with the programmatic formula that the state will pay for. And we look at how those two things can fit together. And a lot of our work over the course of the next 6 months will be doing that, figuring out how we can meet the goals and the aspirations, the pie in the sky aspirations of the high school committee itself, and what the state will allow in terms of square footages and how many spaces, how many science classrooms and things like that. So it's less of a start from the big picture, it's more starts from the middle and kind of work towards the middle to high aspiration and low, and try to work towards the middle from there. But we typically don't start with the swimming pool and the indoor track and so.
The domed athletic stadium.
Right. Chris, you had something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to remind everybody, in case we forget, there's another meeting just like this next week, September 30th. So tell your friends and neighbors what you saw today, and if they said, geez, I wish I could have gone to that meeting, tell them there's another one, September 30th at Mount Ararat High School, same time. Same topic, same presentation. So if they want to hear it, or if you think of some questions, you can give it to them. But there's one more opportunity at this early stage to hear more about the project. So please tell your friends and neighbors. If they live in Bodenham, I don't want them to think they shouldn't go to the Thompson meeting. It's not 4 Thompson, we're just putting 4 meetings in 4 locations to try and make sure everybody has an opportunity.
You had a question up here?
Yeah, I just wonder, given your experience, to what extent does the state prioritize environmentally responsible features in a building? Even though they might, short-term costs might be greater, but long-term savings might make sense.
Yeah, it is a priority for them. They don't prioritize LEED certification through the U.S. Green Building Council, but sustainable long-term return on investment, energy savings is definitely a priority for them. Yeah. Kim, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, and I just they have the square footage down for what they give us, but there could be a little bit of wiggle room too when we're doing the ed specs and we have a program and we can justify why we might need a little bit more space for that program, for working space and safety, that they may allow us a little bit, and that's why they look into what teachers and the staff say they need for programming and how we want the programming and being able to make it flexible so that as education changes, that space could be changed in order to meet those changing needs. And so that's why we do have that set guidelines, and they're going to try to hold to that. But if we can prove that we can justify it's a good thing to do, we may be able to get a little bit more depending on the program.
Yeah, the programming piece of this is a fairly extensive negotiation process with the state. It's multiple meetings. They push back, we push back, they push back, we push back, and finally we arrive at something that we can all agree to.
But majors are good at that.
Okay? So, John is very eloquent and often reminds folks that if you hear something And it doesn't sound true, it's probably not. And it's really important to us as a school system and a community that accurate information gets out there. If people have questions, as you've seen, you can access it directly through the district website. You can email directly to me. You can email to John Hodge. Pick up the phone, give us a call. If you're wondering, ask. If we don't have the answer, we'll tell you we don't have the answer, and how we can go about trying to get it. So please help us make sure that complete and accurate information is out there. Encourage folks to be involved in this process. There will be lots more opportunities as we move from this step all the way up to step 20. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you to those who provided treats.
Grab one on the way out.
And Chris DeJoie for keeping the building open for us this evening. Thank you all very much.